All right, so thank you for joining us for the artist talk with one of the Pump House current exhibiting artists, Whitney Lee Sage. Whitney is a multidisciplinary artist originally from the Metro Detroit, Michigan area with an MFA from Washington University in St. Louis. And she is currently an assistant professor at the art professor of art at North Central College in Naperville, Illinois. In her current exhibition entitled In Landmarks of Absence, Whitney uses drawings and sculpture to focus on the disappearing Rust Belt working class and its neighborhoods and families, communities, and histories. Thanks for joining us, Whitney.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Mhm. So, Whitney, if you wouldn't mind talking a little bit about your work that you currently have on display in the exhibition.
Yeah, that would be wonderful. So the work that's currently on display at Pump House is a series of works that I began in 2017. There's actually two series that are present, both wall-based works. Although you did mention that I also work sculpturally, and I sort of see that body of work as an extension of the two that are on display. But actually just the two-dimensional series are what are currently on display at Pump House. So the body of work that you're seeing in the screen image here is a series entitled Homesickness Series. And this is really where these two bodies of work both started, was this series. And the series, through its sort of monochromatic palette, is meant to evoke the appearance of photography, specifically older traditions of photography like tintype photography. So they're fully monochromatic. They're not black and white, as you can kind of see in the image. I'm using Payne's gray acrylic ink, which gives them sort of a bluish greenish tint in some photos that you'll see. And it just kind of imbues them with a little bit of that same quality that you would see in old historic photography. And so the series was created in direct reaction to the region I grew up in. I'm originally from suburban Detroit, Michigan. And as somebody who grew up in Detroit, I had, in the suburbs of Detroit, I had sort of a front row seat to the population decline that occurred between the middle of the 1900s to present day. And Detroit's a sprawling city. It's 139 square miles. You can fit the cities of San Francisco, Boston, and Manhattan all within their mileage. So it's a large city. It's
Wow.
a sprawling city. Yeah, and it was built to accommodate a really large working class of people who moved up from the South, also immigrants moving from the East that came to Detroit to work in their prolific factories. And so the work is made in response to the population decline that occurred in Detroit, mostly due to the flight of industry from Detroit, but also from the flight of people. So when a city experiences over 50% of its population leaving in just a half a decade's amount of time, what's obviously naturally left behind is a lot of neighborhoods and homes. And so for me, that was a more evocative focus on the issues facing a lot of Midwestern industrial cities, is not necessarily looking at abandoned factories like media likes to sort of focus on, but really looking at what happened to the communities and the people who live there, and the histories and the stories that those neighborhoods and those homes represent. And so Homesickness Series, the word homesickness is both sort of linking to the melancholic longing for a place you're no longer present. But I also like the idea of that word sickness as being in there, as seeing what's happening in Detroit, what's happening to their neighborhoods as a form of social illness that was directly something that history caused. And so kind of looking at the endemic quality of it and just the scale of the problem and its impact on the people who live there.
Very nice. I like the kind of double entendre you have with your title. I hadn't thought about the sickness as being part of the kind of the degradation of the city itself.
Yeah.
So could we talk a little bit more about your practice itself? So how you actually approach one of these works and ultimately how they became just a series themselves.
Yeah, yeah, and I love that this image that is up on the screen right now of my Portraits of Home series, which is a series that directly came out of Homesickness series. But like I said, both series come out of photography. So on a more practical level in terms of how the works function, I rely on a lot of documentary photographs that I've taken around the city of Detroit. I also rely a little bit on some archival imagery. There's some wonderful archives at the Detroit Public Library, as well as some of the local universities that have wonderful public collections of images of Detroit's neighborhoods, specifically images that were taken between the 1900s and the 1950s. And so it's a great way to rely on imagery that I would no longer be able to access because those homes and structures are no longer present and there's not really much evidence of what was left behind. So I take photographs though of homes that I would sort of qualify as being endangered. In a lot of cases, these homes front doors are wide open. They're open to the elements, they're open to people. So they're homes that are not currently occupied by people or by owners of the homes. And so, and in a lot of cases, these homes are probably in a fairly large degree of physical disrepair. So they're homes sort of that are endangered and at risk. And so I was trying to find sort of a way of addressing absence and addressing what happens when we do tear down all of these buildings, you know, what's left behind or what will we never be able to access again. And so the idea of the memories being lost that these sites once contained, you know, was something that was really upsetting to me as somebody who could drive back to Michigan and go to my childhood home and see it. And it still looks very similar to how it looked when I grew up in there. And the idea of having that marker of personal and familial history absent and what it would be like to not be able to access that, I wanted to evoke through the use of the negative shape. So through this white sort of very blank shape that gives a little bit of a hint of what was there, but also there's an avoidance and an inability to fully recall what's left behind. And then also on a practical note, the Portraits of Home series themselves came directly out of the Homesickness series, both through the sort of desire to work with this oval format and to kind of consider homes and their facades as markers of identity, sort of linked to portraiture, because this oval format was often used with old family photos. But also this, on a really practical note, they are very labor intensive works, as you can tell from the layering of the ink and all the detailed line work. And so the series just allows me to, due to their smaller scale, work on a much quicker timeline. So whereas, you know, some of the larger works from the Homesickness series probably are, you know, 40, 50, 60 hours of work, these smaller works are much easier and scalable in terms of the amount of labor, just a few hours to execute each one. And so the goal with that series in particular is for the scale of the series to eventually grow to reflect the scale of the loss and the problem. And so when you think about the fact that thousands of homes have been already torn down over the course of the last, you know, 10, 20 years, it is a large scale problem. And so I want the series and the scale of the series to be more reflective of that.
Yeah, you tied that together beautifully. I see these small vignettes. I think you've referred to them as when you think of like old photographs and portraits of people, and it's kind of this interesting juxtaposition of these kind of large scale, you know, architecture, all individual portraits being in this small size. It's really nice. Could you talk anything more about the colors? I know a lot of our visitors took note of that.
Yeah. The color, I mean, the color serves two purposes. I do think working on the series, the Homesickness series, for such a large amount of time in the black and white format, on just a very personal level, I just missed color. As somebody who previously had been using like the full spectrum of color in her work, working in such a sort of melancholic palette, I think started to have a real dramatic impact on my mood. Um, but I also thought color has this incredible ability to evoke mood and express different feelings. And I liked the idea that by changing the color of each work, it gave them more of an individualistic identity too. And so the idea of the color as kind of reflecting the individual stories and the individual personalities of the home and the histories that were present there. And so it became a means through which you could kind of almost create a lens of the photograph, and that was different from one to the next. So that they did function more as individuals and rather as sort of these nameless sort of carbon copies of their neighbors. And so I liked the idea of color as being a really powerful way of creating character and reflecting back to the individual.
I have to say the third one from the left with the teddy bear in the front, I love that one. That's the one I stopped by the most. There's something haunting about it, I guess.
I mean, it is haunting. I mean, one of the things I find to be the most haunting about that image, and part of the reason I was so struck by it, I actually almost didn't take the photograph that one was based off of, because this is something you see pretty often in Detroit. Is many of the reasons these homes are abandoned is because many people lost their homes during the foreclosure crisis, but also even before that. And so it's not rare to see these sort of piles of things in front of some of these homes and sites, and they're markers of eviction and that very forcible removal of people, which is a completely different lens than just looking at flight. And so I think it's a very real reality in Detroit when you look at the housing values there, and the people that were able to leave and the people who weren't able to leave. And so that image for me is really reflective of a larger issue in Detroit. But that is also, I think, the part of that image that haunts me the most is a child's belonging. It also reminds you of the families and the children that grew up in these homes.
Yeah, kind of a hint at generational changes. So is there anything else you would like to share with our audiences?
No,
seconds.
I mean, I'm so honored for all the people who've come out to Pump House and checked out the work. It's been an absolute pleasure to have the work on display up there, and I had the best time with the install crew who helped me install it. So I guess to thank everybody for the opportunity to share my work, and for everybody who's done so much to make the show happen. The only other thing that I guess I'll say is both series are expanding. And so I love the opportunity for the works to be shown at present, but to make sure to check out the website if you like the work, and follow the sort of progression as more and more works are produced and created as part of both of these bodies of work.
Lovely. So thanks again for joining us, and please stop by the Pump House to view In Landmarks of Absence, which will be on view until January 8th.
Thank you.